Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, listen, do not forget, July the 11th through the 13th, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, right here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Our theme is how we know we're not living in the last days. Obviously, a very critical subject. I'm contacted every week by people who are scared to death that we're living in the last days. Donald Trump is supposedly the man of sin. On and on it goes. But folks, we're not living in the last days. The last days are past. So come be with us July the 11th through the 13th, Ardmore, Oklahoma, for the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. By the way, there's no charge to attend, okay? So come be with us. Okay, this is our continuation of our response and refutation to Sam Frost's book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. I spent a couple of videos sharing with you some thoughts on Sam Frost's admission that John the Baptizer was Elijah. And I would also point out that, to my knowledge, unless I missed something, Sam Frost had not one single keystroke to say in response to my comments about Elijah. And I'll say this again. You cannot admit that John the Baptizer was Elijah and still have a futurist eschatology. It just does not work. Well, we come now to pages 17 and following in Mr. Frost's book, in which he discourses on Matthew chapter 10 and Jesus sending his apostles out on what is known as the limited commission. And I have to tell you, his comments here on the mission and the parousia are some of the most confused and confusing comments you're ever going to read. The trouble of it is, as you proceed in the book, it only gets worse. It's literally astounding how bad the comments get. Now, for brevity's sake, and let me read just a couple of comments here. He quotes or gives us Matthew 10:23. When they persecute you in one city, flee to the next, for truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The context here is the sending out of his disciples into the neighboring cities of Israel. They are forbidden to go to the Gentiles. In this section, Matthew brings in a far greater mission motif than this little one that lasts apparently for a few days, possibly a week, allows. He spoke of them being persecuted, flogged, and killed. Catch this, none of which obviously happened. They returned after a short time and reported that there was success, unquote. Well, he's exactly right in some regards. That's not what is confusing, okay? But then he says, it is in this larger mission of the laborers who would be sent out to the world to harvest that 10:23 displays such an imminent coming, Erchomai of the Son of Man. Where was he going? We have already seen where Jesus intimated that he would be taken from them, that he would enter heaven to sit at the right hand. Matthew consistently uses the prepositional phrase in heaven when referring to the Father and several others. Now, he says, it is plain that when he sits in his glory, pardon me, in heaven, the Son of Man will be able then to say, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world, Matthew 25 and verse 34. Jesus is coming before they finished even going through the cities of Israel would be an accomplished feat. The subjunctive phrasing in Greek does not carry with it a notion of time. Here, both verbs are in the subjunctive form. You will not complete the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes, which is to be understood by the fact that they were being sent to the cities of Israel. Now then, what you really have to catch here is what Mr. Frost is doing. He says there are two missions under consideration. Let's grant that for consideration, okay? He says there is the limited commission, and then this is where it gets confused and confusing insofar as the biblical testimony is concerned. When the disciples have finished the limited commission, which he says lasted, a few days, a week, or whatever, then Jesus ascends to the Father. Now this is where Mr. Frost slips into the text, slips into the discussion, his views of Daniel chapter 7, 13, and 14. Where Daniel said he saw in the night vision one like unto the Son of Man coming unto the Ancient of Days, and there was given unto him a kingdom, and a power, and a dominion over every nation, tongue, and tribe. Mr. Frost believes that was at the ascension of Acts chapter 1. Now, William Vincent and I, at the time that I'm making this video, are engaged in a YouTube video on this. You can find my presentation on my Facebook page. It's posted there. A link is also posted on my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. The point of fact is that Daniel chapter 7, 13, and 14 has absolutely nothing to do with the ascension of Christ in Acts chapter 1. I once believed that it did, but I had to bow to the testimony of the text itself. The vision of Daniel 7, 13, and 14 was a vision of the coming of Christ on the clouds of heaven in judgment of the little horn. That's the interpretation of the vision given in Daniel 7, 15 and following. And I'm sorry, this cannot be disputed. Furthermore, in all New Testament references to the coming of Christ on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, it is judgment context. And thus, to slip in Daniel chapter 7 into the discussion of Matthew 10 and Matthew chapter 24, the sending of the apostles out under the Great Commission, that is simply eisegesis. It is reading into the text what is not there. It is presumptive, and it is wrong. And then, you really, really have to catch the power of this. So Mr. Frost says, he sent out the apostles on the limited commission. They experienced success. Then, in Acts chapter 1, he ascended to the Father. That's his parousia. Well, that's his absence, according to the New Testament. Jesus said, if I do not go away, the Comforter cannot come. The presence of the Spirit was the absence of Christ, not his parousia, not his presence with them. It is his presence with them that would come at his coming, at his erchomai, at his elthi, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, a form of erchomai. And so Mr. Frost completely misinterprets and distorts what the Bible has to say. He says the ascension of Christ is his parousia, when in fact his going to the Father is his absence. That's what he says emphatically in John 14 to 16. If I do not go away, the Spirit cannot come. And thus, Jesus' ascension is not his parousia, it is his absence. He would then come and bring his presence. When would his presence be? Well, let's continue. Pardon me. Having a lot of trouble with my voice this morning. Once again, Mr. Frost has the limited commission, the ascension of Christ, which he calls his parousia, wrongly so, and then we have the Great Commission. And I want you to notice what Mr. Frost does here. He has the sending of the apostles out on the Great Commission to preach, and that's where he applies Matthew 10:23. You will not have finished going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. Now remember, he puts the Parousia before the Great Commission, before they go out to fulfill Matthew 24:14. He has the apostles going out on the Great Commission, and the Great Commission still being carried out, folks. You have to catch the power of this. Because Mr. Frost doesn't believe the end of the age has come. That means the harvest of Matthew chapter 13 has not arrived, because Mr. Frost doesn't believe the end of the world has happened, right? So, Mr. Frost believes that the going out is still going on. Oh, but wait. Jesus told his apostles, you will not have finished going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man has come. Wait. According to Mr. Frost, they didn't even begin going through the cities of Jerusalem, of Israel, in the Great Commission, because until he had already come. You see what he does? Limited Commission, Parousia, Great Commission. And Mr. Frost has Jesus saying, okay, limited commission fulfilled, then Acts chapter 1, the Parousia, then the Great Commission. But the Great Commission was also to Jerusalem and Judea, to Samaria, and to the other parts of the world. But wait, Jesus said, you will not have finished going through the cities of Israel. Well, cities of Israel. Judah and Jerusalem, Israel, Samaria. You will not have finished until the Son of Man comes. Once again, Mr. Frost completely misplaces the Parousia. He has the Parousia instead of the absence of Christ during the Great Commission. But here's what you have to see. When Jesus said, you will not have gone through the cities of Jerusalem, of Israel, he was not referring strictly to the preaching. No. What did Jesus actually say? When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. Gar, Greek word gar. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel. Doing what? Fleeing from persecution. You see, their fleeing wouldn't begin until they went out on the Great Commission. Mr. Frost admits that. He says there was no persecution in the first limited commission. You have to catch the power of that admission. Okay, go out on the limited commission. No persecution, nothing but success. Mr. Frost then says, oh, then you have the parousia of Christ, Jesus going back to heaven, which is his absence, not his presence. And he says that here, this parousia of Christ is when he came before they had gone through all the cities of Israel. Wait a minute. Going through the cities of Israel was fleeing from persecution. It wasn't merely preaching. When did they begin to preach the Great Commission? After his ascension. After Acts chapter 1. They did not begin their preaching after what Mr. Frost calls the parousia, until after that. Do you see the problem here? The problem is that Mr. Frost calls the going through the cities simply as the preaching after the parousia. No, The going through the cities was fleeing from persecution, which followed the preaching in the cities of Israel and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the world. Mr. Frost's paradigm is completely, totally anachronistic. They would go preach into all the world. They would be persecuted, but before they had fled through all the cities, the Son of Man would come. The parousia, in other words, is after the preaching, after and at the time of the persecution. It's not the parousia, then the preaching, then the persecution. No, no. It is the preaching, it is the persecution, then the parousia. And so I say once again, Mr. Frost turns the text upside down. I'll just simply close with the fact that this narrative, preaching, persecution, parousia, is precisely what we find in Matthew chapter 24. And remember, Mr. Frost agrees, that the Great Commission is Matthew 24. Okay? So in Matthew 24, do we have parousia, preaching, persecution? No, we do not. We have them being sent into preaching into all the world. We have them being brought before kings and before councils and before Sanhedrins. So you have preaching, you have persecution, and it is then that you have the coming of the Son of Man on clouds and great glory. Folks, listen to me. It is not parousia, preaching, persecution. Oh, no. It is preaching, persecution, parousia. And thus, one more time, Mr. Frost turns the biblical testimony upside down. He completely distorts it. And that's to be rejected. Listen, if you want a discussion of this pattern of preaching and persecution and parousia, get my book, and don't forget, take advantage. Here we are in the month of June. I have a 2-month special, a 2-book special for the month of June. Into all the world then comes the end. I cover Matthew 10:23, Matthew 24 extensively in this book and show you. Now, obviously, this was written well before Mr. Frost's comments were made, but it nonetheless addresses them head on and refutes them, along with my book, The Last Days Identified. These books together would normally cost you well over $25, okay? For the month of June 2019, and again, I'm sorry I cannot make this offer to overseas purchasers, but if you want a copy, we can make arrangements for PDF, for electronic version, but for U.S. orders, $18.95 post-paid. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Take advantage of the offer. It's on the right-hand side. Just scroll down. You'll see the June 2019 2-book special. I'll see you on the flip side.